Before the world knew him as Dr. Dre, he was just Andre Young, a kid from Compton with a passion for sound and turntables. In the early 80s, Dre was producing gangster rap. He was spinning at a local club as a part of the world-class wrecking crew, donning sequence and eyeliner in LA's electro scene. It was flashy, funky, and far from the street realism Dr. Dre would become for known today. But under the surface, Dre was going restless. He didn't want to spin records. He wanted to create them. Behind the board, he was a natural. In 808 drums with precise cuts, mastering the Roland TR 808 and SP 1200 like a jazz musician finds his horn. By the time he leaped with Eazy-E, a local hustler with money and a voice that cut through tracks like a razor, something was brewing. In 1987, they formed Ruthless Records with the guys of manager Jerry Heller and Dr. Dre teaming up with Eazy-E, Ice Cube, MC Ren, and DJ Yella to form N.W.A. In 1988, they dropped the bomb, Straight Outta Compton. This was Dr. Dre's major production masterpiece. It was raw, aggressive, and apologetically black. Dre didn't just produce beats. He created sonic war zones. The drum patterns on Straight Outta Compton, the screeching sirens and booming low end of Fuck the Police, the funky chaotic bounce of Gangsta Gangsta. This wasn't just music. It was a revolution, and Dr. Dre was the general behind the boards. While Ice Cube's rhymes and Eazy's delivery got the headlines, Dr. Dre's production was the foundation. Every stretch, every loop, every sample, from funkadelic grooves to Ohio player stabs, was handpicked to evoke power and paranoia. At the same time, Dr. Dre was quietly crafting another project, Eazy's debut solo album, Eazy Does It, released just weeks after Straight Outta Compton. The album was nearly entirely produced by Dr. Dre, who flipped funk samples into funky, cartoonish, yet hard-hitting beats that fit Eazy's high-pitched flow like a glove. Eazy Does It and We Want Eazy weren't just tracks, they were moments. Dre even interpolated Zab's talkbox sound, foreshadowing his G-Funk evolution years before it took over. But behind the boards, friction was building. Ice Cube was frustrated over royalties and left in 1989. Internal disputes over money and power began to spread. Dr. Dre, who had never truly owned his masters or publishing, began to feel the constraints of Ruthless Records. Still, between 1988 and 1990, Dr. Dre had produced a soundtrack to the streets. He had taken hip-hop out the Bronx boom bap and brought it to the West Coast with cinematic clarity, introducing layered synth, slower tempos, and bass-driven backbone that changed the feel of rap music. This wasn't just production, it was vision, it was architecture, and Dr. Dre was just getting started. But soon, he'll walk away from the empire he helped build to create something even bigger. By the dawn of the 90s, the empire Dr. Dre helped build at Ruthless Records was cracking. Behind the platinum plaques and magazine covers, Dr. Dre was frustrated. He wasn't seeing the money, he wasn't seeing the ownership, he just produced Straight Outta Compton, Eazy Does It, and the N.W.A. records. Yet, he had no control over his masters, no equity, no creative freedom. Enter Suge Knight, a former bodyguard turned music businessman. Suge promised Dr. Dre a new path, a fresh start, free from contracts and control. By the summer of 1991, Suge Knight had extracted Dr. Dre from Ruthless through a mix of lures and intimidation. What followed was the founder of one of the most infamous labels in music history, Death Row Records. With Dr. Dre as a flagship artist and an in-house producer, Death Row was built like a fortress of sound. No middleman, no compromises, just Dre, a studio, and a vision. The first record, not an album, not a posse cut, but a song for a movie soundtrack, Deep Cover. Released in 1992 for the Deep Cover movie, the track was dark, slow-burning, and paranoid. Dre's beat felt like a slow-motion drive-by, layered with haunting bass lines, ghostly synth, and reverb-drenched snares. It introduced a young Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre's new protege, with a laid-back, melodic flow that floated effortlessly over Dr. Dre's tension-filled production. Deep Cover was a mission statement. Death Row wasn't here to play. This was a new West Coast. This marked the turning point in Dr. Dre's evolution. Gone were the fast-paced, sample-heavy loops of the late 80s in their place for a more controlled, cinematic sound, measured, deliberate, and drenched in funk. Behind the boards, Dr. Dre began recording with live instruments, working closely with the musicians to replay grooves, recreate classic funk vibes, and avoid sample clearances. This method gave Dr. Dre full control over the mix, allowing his beats to breathe and build like movie scores. Dr. Dre wasn't just producing, he was sculpting moods. This period also marked Dr. Dre's shift into executive production, no longer just beatmaker. He was now overseeing artists, crafting visions, and setting sonic identities. He began building his own roster, Daz Dillinger, Corrupt, Nate Dogg, RBX, and more, assembling what would soon become the Death Row dynasty. But the real earthquake was still coming. In the late 1992, Dr. Dre began recording what would become one of the most influential and important albums in rap history, a project that wouldn't just define West Coast rap, but it will redefine the sound of the entire genre. This was a calm before the storm. In the summer of 1992, Dr. Dre unleashed a sonic earthquake that reshaped hip-hop forever. That album was called The Chronic and was more than a debut. It was a declaration that gangsta rap could be lush, musical, and sophisticated, that street stories could be told not just through verses, but through live instruments, harmonies, and hooks, that the producer was now the architect. Nothing But a G Thing was the lead single, and from that point on, it was clear. This wasn't just rap. This was West Coast jazz funk filtered through Compton's concrete. Dr. Dre had created G-Funk, built a slowed-down Parliament funkadelic grooves, layered synth, warm bass lines, whiny mood leads, and laid-back rhythms. G-Funk wasn't just a subgenre, it was a lifestyle. The Chronic wasn't angry like N.W.A. It was cooler, smoother, it floated. But don't get twisted, it was still raw. Across 16 tracks, Dre created a gangsta opera featuring the full Death Row roster: Snoop Dogg, Daz Dillinger and Corrupt, Nate Dogg, and Dre himself. But it wasn't the production that turned heads. This wasn't just about making beats. It was about crafting a sonic environment. On Let Me Ride, Dre replayed Parliament's Mothership Connection, built it into a West Coast cruising anthem, and layered it with live horns, background vocals, and those signature Dr. Dre drums. On Dre Day, he introduced Beef as theater, going at Eazy-E and Luke with a diss track that sounded like a theme song for a villain's entrance, funky, triumphant, and laced with menace. Even the skits and interludes were cinematic. The Chronic felt like a movie set in South Central, with Dr. Dre as the director, the composer, and the narrator. Critics didn't just praise the album, they bowed to it. The Chronic was a sonic revolution. It turned Dr. Dre into a streetwise beatmaker, into a super producer, and introduced the world to Snoop Dogg, who would become a superstar before his own debut even dropped, and it elevated Death Row Records from a startup to a dominant cultural force. But beyond the music, the Chronic reprogrammed hip-hop's entire sound palette. In New York, producers were still chopping dusty samples and boot-bap breaks, but on the West Coast, Dr. Dre orchestrated a genre shift, one that was slower, more melodic, and radio-ready, while still being street-approved. Every detail from the bass line, reverb tail, all meticulously crafted. Dr. Dre's mixing was immaculate. His drums hit with purpose. His transitions were cinematic. And most importantly, he made it look easy. The Chronic didn't just sound different, it felt different. It was a soundtrack to a new West Coast confidence, a smoother, funkier, but no less dangerous energy. And it set the tone for an entire decade. But for Dre, it was only the beginning. His next act produced one of the most anticipated debut albums in hip-hop history, starring the lanky kid with the braids he introduced on nearly every track of The Chronic. Snoop Dogg was up next, and Dr. Dre was right behind him. After The Chronic, Dr. Dre didn't just have momentum, he had a movement. But the truth says of a super producer is this: can't do it again. Not just once, but twice. Not for himself, but for someone else. That someone else was Snoop Dogg, a lanky, laid-back MC from Long Beach with a voice like Honey Did Dynamite. Dr. Dre already introduced Snoop Dogg on The Chronic, but now it was time for the world to see what Snoop Dogg could really do. In November of 1993, Dr. Dre executive produced Snoop Dogg's debut album, Doggy Style. It was the most anticipated debut album in hip-hop history at that time, and somehow it lived up to the hype. Gin and Juice, What's My Name, Murder Was the Case, these weren't just songs, they were West Coast anthems. Dr. Dre took the G-Funk sound he pioneered on The Chronic and polished it to perfection. The production was slicker, the synths was tighter, the drums was punchier, the funk was deeper. Dre and his team, Daz Dillinger, Sam Snead, and Superfly, crafted a sonic playground for Snoop's silky, controversial flow. Every track on Doggy Style had that signature Dre feel: clean, loud, rich, layered, and instantly recognizable. The snares snapped like gunshots, the bass line slithered, the hooks stuck in your head for weeks. And once again, Dr. Dre proved that he was more than just a producer. He was a storyteller, a director, a sound designer who made the music feel like a film. And the numbers didn't lie. Doggy Style sold over 800,000 copies in its first week. It debuted at #1 on the Billboard charts, a historic feat for a debut album. Meanwhile, Death Row Records, now home to Dre, Snoop, the Dog Pound, and a rising roster, had become the most powerful label in hip-hop. The success wasn't just musical, it was cultural. West Coast swagger was on full display. The music videos were cinematic, the album artwork, the cars, the clothes, the slang, it was all Death Row design. And at the center of all, Dre, quiet, focused, meticulous, and deadly with a beat. Even outside the albums, Dre was dominating. In 1994, he produced a soundtrack cut, Murder Was the Case, turning a fictional song on Doggy Style into a short film and EP, complete with a haunting gospel-infused remix. The orchestration, the choir, the booming drums, this was ghetto gospel before Kanye. Dre wasn't making rap songs anymore. He was creating hip-hop cinema. During this era, Dre also began mentoring and collaborating with young talent like Warren G, his stepbrother, and Nate Dogg, helping shape the G-Funk family tree even beyond Death Row's roster. But not everything was smooth behind the scenes. Suge Knight's reign at Death Row was increasingly marked by violence, intimidation, and paranoia. The label was becoming more of a criminal enterprise than a music company, and Dre, ever the perfectionist, ever the artist, began to pull away from the chaos. Still, from 1993 to 1995, Dr. Dre was untouchable. He had created back-to-back classics, The Chronic and Doggy Style. He had changed hip-hop sound, expanded its sonic palette, and raised the bar for what rap production could be. He had built a label that looked like an empire, but as the label grew, so did the darkness. But soon, a legend would return from prison, a firestorm would ignite, and Dr. Dre will be faced with one of the most powerful, chaotic, and ultimately tragic collaborations of his career. Tupac was coming, and Dr. Dre was about to produce an anthem for the Death Row. Wasn't just a label, it was a movement, a machine, a myth. But even as Dr. Dre sat on top of the industry, he helped reshape the chaos inside Death Row was growing. Suge Knight power plays, internal feuds, street politics, bleeding into the boardroom. Dre made the sound, but now the sound was out of control. Then came the turning point. In October of 1995, Tupac Shakur was released from prison, bailed out by Suge Knight with a $1.4 million advance and a 3-album promise to Death Row. And just like that, the most electrifying, controversial, and prolific rapper of the moment became the newest soldier in Dre's army. Dre wasted no time. Within weeks, the two collided on what would become one of the biggest hip-hop singles of all time, California Love. Dr. Dre's production here was next level. It was a blend of G-Funk and electro-funk, resurrecting Roger Troutman and Zab's Talk About His Magic, blending it with Chris drums, gliding synths, and a festival-sized hook. It was Dre at his most cinematic, crafting an anthem that felt both futuristic and nostalgic. It was more than a song. It was a West Coast cry. Released at the very end of 1995, California Love was a massive hit, #1 on the Billboard's Hot 100, nominated for a Grammy, and a defining post-prison moment for Tupac. But behind the scenes, things were shifting. When Tupac began recording his double album, All Eyes on Me, Dr. Dre was expected to lead the production, but he only delivered a few tracks, most notably California Love and the eerie piano-laced Can't See Me, featuring George Clinton. Why? Because by early 1996, Dre already mentally checked out of Death Row. Death Row had turned into a storm. Suge Knight was running like a mob boss. Pac was aggressive, unpredictable, recording obsessively, and dissing everyone in sight. The studio was filled with guns, groupies, and paranoia. Dre, reserved, meticulous, and always focused on music, found himself out of place in the label he helped build. He wanted order, focus, and creative freedom. Death Row now represented everything he hated, but still, the impact was undeniable. All Eyes on Me released in February 1996 and was a nuclear bomb in hip-hop, a double album filled with thunderous beats, bold lyrics, and unfiltered emotion. And even if Dr. Dre's role was small, his influence was everywhere. California Love wasn't just a hit. It was a symbol of West Coast dominance. It was Dr. Dre's last roar as Death Row's general. Shortly after, Dr. Dre made a bold and dangerous move. He left Death Row, left the millions, left the masters, left Suge, left the madness. He walked away from the throne with nothing but his name and his vision. Critics called him crazy. They said his best days were behind him, that he couldn't survive without Snoop, Pac, or Suge. But Dr. Dre didn't panic because he knew something they didn't. He had a plan. And soon, he would build a new label, discover a white kid from Detroit with unmatched lyricism, and drop a comeback album so powerful it would silence everyone. The Death Row chapter was closed, but Dr. Dre was about to write the future. In 1996, Dr. Dre did the unthinkable. He walked away from Death Row Records with no masters, no money, no safety net. He left behind Snoop, Suge, Pac, millions of royalties, and the empire he built from scratch. All he took with him was his name and a new idea. The idea, a label called Aftermath Entertainment. But this wasn't just a business decision. It was creative reset. Dr. Dre wasn't trying to recreate Death Row. He was trying to evolve into something bigger, something cleaner, something focused solely on music, not street drama. In late 1996, Dr. Dre dropped The Aftermath, a compilation album meant to showcase his new roster and signal the future. But the reception, cold. The single Been There Done That was meant to represent Dre's maturity, stepping away from violence, embracing business. But fans didn't want maturity. They wanted The Chronic Part 2. The album flopped commercially and critically. It was Dr. Dre's first L in a decade. In that moment, it looked like the critics were right. Maybe Dr. Dre had lost it. Maybe he needed Suge Knight and the Death Row chaos to make magic. But while the world doubted, Dre got back in the studio, sharpening his sound, studying the next wave, listening, waiting, plotting. Then, in 1998, a Detroit MC named Marshall Mathers, aka Eminem, landed on the desk, and everything changed. Dr. Dre was instantly impressed, not just by the speed and punch of M's flow, but by the unpredictability, the character voices, and the writing. He saw in Eminem what he hadn't seen since discovering Snoop. Pure, raw talent wrapped in charisma. So Dre did what he always did with stars. He developed them. He brought Eminem into the studio. He shaped the sound. He made sure the mix, the beats, the energy matched the chaos of M's words. In 1999, they dropped My Name Is. The beat was a circus. A warped lullaby software sample, bouncing bass, Dr. Dre's clean, punchy drums, and a 24-year-old white kid from Detroit saying the wildest shit anyone had ever heard on mainstream radio. It was a sensation. Eminem's debut album, the Slim Shady LP, executive produced by Dr. Dre, debuted at number 2 on the charts and went platinum in weeks. And suddenly, Aftermath was back in the game. Dr. Dre had done what few producers in music history had ever pulled off. He had reinvented himself. He had found the future. And most importantly, he still had the touch. But Dr. Dre wasn't done. While the world was still processing the Slim Shady invasion, Dr. Dre was quietly preparing his own comeback. Since The Chronic, Dr. Dre hadn't released a solo album, and now he had something to prove. The critics, the doubters, the industry, himself. 1999 was the year Dr. Dre reminded the world, you can't erase a legend. In November of 1999, Dr. Dre did what few artists, let alone producers, have ever done. He staged the greatest comeback in hip-hop history. 6 years removed from The Chronic, out of death row, dismissed by critics, starting over, and then he dropped 2001. From the very first notes of Still Dre, the message was clear. The king had returned. Still Dre wasn't just a song. It was a statement of dominance. With a piano loop written by Scott Storch, bars penned by Jay-Z, and a cold mechanical beat that pounded like steel on concrete, Dr. Dre reminded the world exactly who built the sound they've all copied. But 2001 wasn't The Chronic 2 in the name, because it was something bigger in execution. Where The Chronic was funky and organic, 2001 was cold, cinematic, digital, and futuristic. This was Gangsta Rap 2.0, reprogrammed for a new millennium. And the features stacked. Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Exhibit, Nate Dogg, and Dre himself. Tracks like The Watcher showed his introspection. Forget About Dre proved his new school dominance with Eminem riding shotgun. And the next episode, that was the national anthem. Every beat on 2001 was flawless. Tight drums, lush synths, layered strings, clean engineering. Dre was working with co-producers like Melman, Scott Storch, and Mike Elizondo, combining live instrumentation with digital sequencing. The result, a record that sounded like a blockbuster movie, polished, massive, and unrelenting. But 2001 wasn't just an album, it was a launchpad. Through its success, Dr. Dre reestablished Aftermath Entertainment as a true powerhouse. And just like The Chronic had done for Snoop, 2001 did for Eminem, elevated him from a rising star to a household name. It also laid the groundwork for the next chapter, the rise of 50 Cent, The Game, and a new generation of Aftermath dominance. Dr. Dre had already officially pulled off the impossible. He'll change the sound of hip-hop in the 80s with N.W.A., revolutionized it in the 90s with The Chronic and Death Row, reinvented himself in the late 90s with Eminem, and reasserted his dominance in 1999 with 2001. It wasn't luck, it wasn't hype, it was Dr. Dre's relentless pursuit of perfection. Every hi-hat, every synth, every snare. He wasn't just a producer, he was a visionary. By the end of 2001, no one in the music industry had a bigger resume, a sharper sound, or more cultural weight than Dr. Dre. He had gone from Compton streets to the top of the industry twice, and in doing so, he became the most important hip-hop producer of all time. By 2001, Dr. Dre had done the impossible. He redefined hip-hop sound 3 different times in 3 different eras with 3 different labels. But Dr. Dre never saw himself as just a producer. He was a systems architect. He didn't just create beats. He built ecosystems, and by the early 2000s, those systems were fully operational. His label, Aftermath, was no longer a risky startup. It was an empire. He had Eminem, now the biggest rapper in the world. And by 2002, Dr. Dre had his eyes on the next chapter, a street soldier from South Jamaica, Queens, scarred by gunfire and betrayal, a mixtape assassin with the hunger of a wolf, 50 Cent. Dr. Dre, alongside Eminem, who executive produced 50 Cent's Get Rich or Die Trying, one of the biggest debut albums in rap history, selling over 870,200 copies in its first week and eventually going 9 times platinum. Tracks like In the Club, Back Down, and If I Can't had Dr. Dre's fingerprints all over them. Crushing drums, clean loops, medicine synths, and precision engineering. 2003, Dr. Dre wasn't just producing music anymore. He was building stars. Eminem, 50 Cent, The Game, even guiding Snoop through new phases, touching tracks for Eve, Busta Rhymes, Mary J. Blige, Rakim, Truth Hurts, and others. He had transformed from artist to mogul. But the reason Dre mattered wasn't just his hits. It was his legacy of detail, his refusal to release anything unless it was sonically perfect, his ability to evolve and innovate without losing the core of his identity. From 1988 to 2003, Dr. Dre did more than just change the sound of rap. He had changed the standards. He taught producers to care about mixes, craft albums like films, push artists to be better, think beyond the moment. And through the perfectionism, he became the most trusted brand in hip-hop production. Even as he grew quieter in the public eye, Dre's influence was everywhere, in the sonic polish of Kanye West, in the cinematic vision of Kendrick Lamar, in the technical precision of producers like Hit Boy, Mike Will, and Metro Boomin, and in the business blueprint of every artist turned mogul, from N.W.A. to The Chronic, from Snoop to M, from 2001 to Get Rich or Die Trying. This wasn't just a run, it was a reign. And through it all, Dr. Dre stayed true to his code. I'm never comfortable, I never relax. Because if you're comfortable, someone's coming for your spot. From the 808s of Compton, to the boardrooms of Interscope, to the headphones on your ears, Dr. Dre didn't just produce hits, he produced eras.